안녕하세요. 여러분의 한국어 선생님 고빌리입니다. Welcome to the sixth and final part in my series where I analyze the Korean speaking of MONSTA X. Now, if this is your first time seeing me, I'm a Korean teacher. I've been learning Korean for over 20 years and teaching it here on YouTube for over 13 years. And so far, I've made analysis videos about Shonu, Minhyuk, Kiyeon, Hyungwon, and Juhon. So today, I'll finally be sharing my analysis of I am. And this video will include everything that I've noticed about him over the past 4 weeks since I started preparing for this series, and will include information you probably didn't know about him, unless you speak fluent Korean, including how he sounds overall, his voice tone, any unique expressions that he uses, and just everything that stands out to me as a Korean teacher. But before we begin, I want to say thank you to the sponsor of this entire video series, my wonderful Patreon supporters and my YouTube channel members. You're the ones who are keeping the lights on here and allowing me to make videos like these without having to fill them up with lots of advertisements. And if you're watching but you're not one of my Patreon members, please consider joining my Patreon page. It really helps me to keep this channel running and to keep my videos free, and it helps me to keep making more and better Korean learning content, as well as more videos just like these. So check out my Patreon page in the video description below. Okay, now let's get started with today's analysis, and of course I'll be looking at I am, whose full name is chang-gyun.
안녕하세요, mon-bebe. IM입니다.
I am was born in January of 1996, making him the official 막내. Notice that it's pronounced 막내, which means the youngest member in a group. He was born in the city of Suwon, which is about an hour south of Seoul. However, as a child, he moved to the city of Gwangju, which is the same city that Hyungwon is from. Before joining Starship Entertainment, he actually didn't even want to be a performer, but he said he wanted to be a scientist like his father. He eventually attended an audition in high school and joined a company as a trainee for a different music group, but that company closed, so he ended up joining Starship Entertainment and eventually became a part of MONSTA X. In MONSTA X, his role is the lead rapper, and he also contributes a lot to writing and composing songs.
How are you today? Good. As usual.
Okay, now before I look at his speech, let's talk about my first impressions. And just like before, I'll be showing just a few clips from my research. So here is the first clip that I want to share with you.
안녕하십니까. 저는 몬스타엑스 카페의 해외 업무 담당 MBA 역할을 담당하고 있습니다.
저희 카페가 해외
그럼요.
지사가 있어요?
원두를 또 이제 수입해야 되지 않습니까?
해외 저희 몇 개의 지사가 있어요?
일단 본사가 잘 돼야죠.
없는 거네요.
미래를 위한
그러니까 미래를 위한.
그렇죠.
네.
My first impression of I am is unique from all the other members because he kind of strikes me as almost like a foreigner. Not really in how he speaks Korean, although funnily enough, he does use some dialect, which I'll talk about, but in a lot of his mannerisms. And the first thing that told me this was when I was watching some clips of him on a radio show, and when Kiyeon was talking with him about MBTI, I am responded like this.
지금 그 MBTI에서 T면은 완전 잘했다가 와닿고 F는 열심히 안 한 것 같다고 하는 게 더 와닿는다는데 저는 F인데 왜 더 잘했다고 하는 것처럼 들리죠? 역시 그거는 이제 과학이 아니네요. MBTI는.
관심 없어, MBTI.
네, 그냥 전 E만 밀고 가겠습니다.
관심 없어.
자, 보고 싶은 mon-bebe.
If you don't get why this is funny, MBTI is basically like the pseudoscience way of classifying someone's personality based on just 4 different letters. And from about a decade ago in Korea, it's become the most popular way to do this. It used to be you'd do this with asking someone's blood type, or maybe in the 80s how people would ask, what's your sign? But some Koreans take MBTI too seriously. And I've even heard that some companies have specifically like only hired people based on their MBTI, or people would use it to try to find out like relationship issues with MBTI. So sometimes it's fun, but sometimes it can be a bit annoying. And I am is just not interested at all in judging people by that. And he says it clearly to Kiyeon twice. So I can totally understand.
관심 없어, MBTI.
네, 그냥 전 E만 밀고 가겠습니다.
관심 없어.
I get the feeling from watching a lot of videos of him that he is one of, if not the most open-minded member that he's less traditional than the average Korean. And this might not stand out to you if you're already from another country, but it really stands out to me since Korea is typically fairly conservative. And I.M seems super polite, a really kind person, and I often saw him going out of his way to thank people in situations where he didn't even have to. Like, I was just watching one of his live streams, and then suddenly at the end, he starts thanking his staff members and then thanking his company, even though it's just him sitting by himself on the couch. So here's that clip.
저한테 이런 시간과 이제 기회를 허락해준 저희 회사 관계자분들한테도 감사하다는 말 전하고 싶고요. 가깝게 지내는 저희 스태프분들한테도 감사하다는 말 전하고 싶고요.
So yeah, he just seems extremely polite and friendly. But my other first impression is actually how he speaks Korean, because I mentioned that he moved to Gwangju as a child, but he actually spent most of that time living abroad. So he was able to learn English in addition to Korean. So because of that, he also speaks Korean a bit uniquely from the other members, and I'll talk about that soon as well. Okay, anyway, so let's get into my analysis of I.M's Korean speaking, and the first thing that I want to point out is his voice tone. I.M's voice tone is the lowest in the group, even lower than Shonu, who I previously said had an especially low voice. But here's a clip I have where I.M and Shonu are speaking together, and just listen to how their voice tones sound different.
길 가다가 mon-bebe 한 분 있어요. 나도 만났는데 배웠는데 한 번도 혀 컸어. 이걸 한 번도 해본 적이 없어.
뭐라고?
혀 컸어.
이걸 하기로 했는데?
이걸 아말리에 정했을 때 그에 대해서 한 번도 한 적이 없어.
그럼 최근에 저 mon-bebe 분을
It's like this and this. But not only is I.M's voice tone lower than Shonu, but it's also much softer. And I think this means that if you're someone who's learning Korean, especially if you're still in the beginner level, then I.M might be the most difficult member to understand. And I have one more video to compare his tone with, and that's Minhyuk, whose voice has a higher tone. And note how in this clip, you can clearly hear Minhyuk's voice, but you can barely hear I.M. So here's the clip.
나는 10월에 했나 이즈미컷?
나 포토
네.
그거 앵콜 한 번 더 하셔가지고 나 그거 하던데.
창균이 거 앵콜 할 수도 있다는데?
아니 그러니까
아니야?
그러니까 여러 명이랑 이렇게 해가지고
어.
다시 이제 재오픈하는 뭐 그런 게 있나 봐.
But I.M's tone isn't the only thing that I think can make his Korean more difficult to understand. It's how he speaks. Specifically, he often doesn't speak clearly and he mumbles when he speaks. And here's a clip of that.
혼자 할 때랑 이제 팀이랑 할 때 차이점은 내가 억텐을 내지 않아도 된다는 거. 내 시간을 이렇게 온전히 할애를 할 수가 있는 거지. 그러면
And you can hear at the end of his sentences where his tone even goes down more. But just having a low voice makes it difficult to hear someone, but you can remedy this normally by just increasing the volume. However, mumbling is a bit more challenging to fix, at least for beginners, because he's not pronouncing all of his words clearly. And this part of his speaking was the easiest for me to find examples of because it happens most of the time. So I just want to show two clips now at once, and then I'm going to give you some advice for how you can understand what's going on.
뽑아달라는 뽑아줬네.
발표하는 애는 들어줘야지. 애 느낌 왔어.
왜? 뭔데?
불길해. 장점은 막내로서의 장점이라기보다는
네.
저희 멤버가 제가 멤버로서의 장점을 얘기를 하면
네네네.
저희 멤버들은 일단 배려를 좀 많이 해주는 타입인 것 같아요. 저희는 그런 게 없거든요. 막 나이 어리다고 해가지고 무조건 1번 하고 맨 마지막에 끝나고 그런 게 없고 그냥 공평하게 진짜 다 가위바위보로 하고 그런
좋죠.
다 그렇지 않나요?
So when he speaks, he sounds very relaxed. And because of that, he doesn't enunciate clearly. Here's just one more clip, and you can't see him, but you can hear him. He's ordering coffee.
아이스 아메리카노.
과일 라떼 말이에요. 저 딸기 라떼 하나 주세요.
Now, don't feel bad if you can't understand him, even if you're past the beginner level, because even Koreans can have a hard time understanding him sometimes. Now, I can understand him fine, but what do I know that can help you to better understand him? So I'm going to give you some tips for what you can pay attention to. And my first tip is that if you're listening to him speak, you'll have a much better chance of understanding him if you're in a very quiet environment. And if you're focusing on him instead of doing anything else. I don't think I'd be able to understand him if I were doing the dishes while listening to his voice, or if I had a video of him up in the background. So bring his voice into the foreground. The next tip, pay attention to how he pronounces his consonants more than his vowels. And a common consonant you should look out for is the consonant 지읒, which is the J letter. Like when he says the word 제가 or the word 무조건. Anytime he uses this consonant, since it's a consonant that normally takes a bit of air to say, he says it softer than it should be. So instead of like 제가, it can sound almost like 제가, almost like a soft Z. And also in the word 무조건, he says it kind of like 무조건, like that. And you can also hear it in the grammar form 가지고, which he says almost like 가지고, like that. So I'm going to replay part of a clip that we just watched, and I want you to pay attention to just that sound.
장점은
네네네.
막내로서의 장점이라기보다는
네.
저희 멤버가 제가 멤버로서의 장점을 얘기를 하면
네네네.
저희 멤버들은 일단 배려를 좀 많이 해주는 타입인 것 같아요. 저희는 그런 게 없거든요. 막 나이 어리다고 해가지고 무조건 1번 하고 맨 마지막에 끝나고 그런 게 없고 그냥 공평하게 진짜 다 가위바위보로 하고 그런 다 그렇지 않나요?
If you're ever listening to someone speak Korean, not just I am, and you hear what sounds kind of like a Z, like a soft Z, there is no Z sound in Korean, so it means that person is mumbling a bit. Besides that, what he's also doing is he's blurring the rest of his consonants together. So instead of pronouncing each consonant clearly, he softens them and they get blurred into one. Like here in this clip where he repeatedly says 수고하셨습니다. So 수고하셨습니다, basically good work.
수고했습니다. 수고했습니다. 수고했습니다.
And all of this means that in order to completely understand what words he's saying, you really have to already either know the word really well or completely understand the rest of the sentence so that you can use that to help fill in the blank. For example, if he says the word 무조건, but you can't understand what he says, and all you hear is like 무조건 or something, you'd have to already know everything else in the sentence to be able to guess that that was the word he was saying. So yeah, it's challenging even for a Korean speaker. And that's why I really recommend removing any sort of distractions when you're listening to him. Doing that won't mean that you'll be able to understand him perfectly, but it'll at least give you the best possible chance to understand him. Also, it helps that most of the time he's not talking by himself anyway, but he's usually seen talking together with another member. And it's common that that member will restate something that I am just said. So it's kind of like the other members will occasionally act as a translator for him. And I have an example of that happening here.
맨 안쪽에 있는 거.
무슨 색이요?
그 쇠고리가 있는 안쪽.
이거 제 오른쪽 거 여기?
네네.
쇠고리?
네.
And I should clarify though, before we go any further, this sort of pronunciation is not rare. I hear it from time to time, but it is something that he does often too. So make sure to turn on the Korean subtitles whenever you can. Okay, the next thing that I want to share is kind of related to this, but it's also something else that can make his speech a bit difficult to understand. And that's his overall speed. And I have a clip, so this time I only want you to focus on how fast he's talking.
고추참치라면 맛있겠다 이거. 이것도 사. 허니버터 팝콘 맛있겠다 이거. 일단 현호님 거 프로틴 여기. 그리고 고추참치라면 혹시 좋아하시는 분? 이거 좀 신기해서 좀 사봤는데.
Now, depending on your level, any speaking might sound fast, but compared with the average Korean, I wouldn't say he speaks that fast. But I would say it's on the faster side. Okay, so that's enough about his voice. Next, I want to talk about what many of you are probably wondering, and that is how he actually speaks Korean, like overall. Because I mentioned that he lived abroad for most of his childhood, and you can usually tell when someone learns Korean outside of Korea, because they will speak the language a little bit differently. And IM has actually talked about this before. I read an article where he said that his first language was actually English, and that he feels that he's still not completely comfortable with speaking Korean. And I have a video clip of him saying this too. Now, don't laugh, this was from way back when they first debuted, but here's a short clip of that.
제가 사실 한국말도 제대로 못하는데
거짓말하시면 안 돼요.
지금 인터뷰 하는데도 한국말을 잘 못하고 있기 때문에
저희랑 대화하는 것처럼 평상시에 하세요.
형이랑 대화를 잘 안 해서 잘 모르겠는데 네. 안녕하세요. 저 열심히 잘할 자신 있습니다.
You can, though, hear a little bit of that ziet sound again, the slight Z in there. Now, he's, of course, joking in this clip. He's just pretending to stutter, and he's joking that he can't speak Korean well, when in the video he's speaking it perfectly. But normally, if I wanted to identify someone who learned Korean outside of Korea, one of the most common things that I'll look for is if they are using foreign words for things that already have a more common Korean word. So what I did is I watched a lot of videos and I was looking for that and I couldn't find it. So despite spending at least 7 years of his childhood outside of Korea, at least 7 years it seems, his Korean is fine. In case you were wondering about how he sounds like a Korean. Newsflash, I did find a few interesting things related to his speech. Not about that, but going back to where he said he grew up in Korea, he said he was from the city Gwangju, which is also where Hyungwon grew up. But while Hyungwon frequently uses dialect, I.M. uses no dialect. He sounds like anyone else from Seoul. Except sometimes, rarely, but sometimes, I did catch him using some unique Korean words from that dialect. So he might use an expression or a word or some intonation from dialect. And to be clear, he doesn't know dialect, but he sometimes does impressions of dialects. And like in this video clip I found where he was trying to do a Gyeongsang dialect, but it's kind of mixed up with Gwangju dialect and Gwangju intonation together. So it sounds kind of funny, but let's give it a listen.
무엇이냐면 이것이 운동장이 아니고 눈동자라 카드 이게 이 요래 직선으로 돼 있는 것이 그거다 그 사람 눈 홍채 같은 거 그거 그리고 저 가운데 원이 아이가 저기가 동공이다 아이가 기현이 형이 눈이 멀었다 아이가 저기서 깬다 여기서 눈을 뜬다 여기서 눈을 떠갖고 제가 보기에는 시력을 되찾는 것 같다 그렇다 됐나 이제 막 궁금증이 막 송송송 해결되구나.
He's trying really hard there to use dialect. But anyway, another clip that I found was him accidentally using Gwangju dialect during a radio show. So in this clip, he uses the word 몇 요일, which is pronounced as 몇 요일, kind of 몇 요일. And he asks 오늘 몇 요일입니까? Like meaning what day of the week is today. However, 몇 요일 is dialect. And it's kind of hard to say, actually. In standard Korean, the word 몇 is only used before a counter, and it means how many, like 몇 개 for how many things, or 몇 명 for how many people. And the standard way to ask the day of the week is with the word 무슨, not 몇. So this would be 무슨 요일, like what day of the week. So anyway, here's the clip.
자 반갑습니다.
네.
오늘 몇 요일입니까?
몇 요일은 뭐예요?
몇 요일입니까?
무슨 요일 아니에요?
그래요?
몇 일이에요?
야 오늘 몇 요일이냐?
무슨 요일이냐? 몇 일이죠?
에? 이게 사투리라고?
아 그래요? 이게 사투리라고?
충격.
몇 요일이 사투리예요?
충격. 공포.
나도 처음 알았네.
Yeah, so don't learn dialect from IM, but it's still fun when he does it. And I also found a few more cases where he uses incorrect Korean words occasionally. Like in this clip I found where he picks up a stegosaurus, but he calls it a stegosaurus.
스테고라우스.
But it's just like occasional tiny mistakes like that and nothing that affects his overall Korean. And I was wondering how he was able to have learned Korean so well, actually, despite not living in Korea for most of his childhood. And I found some articles that said what he did was he watched a lot of Korean shows to keep up with everything that was going on. And it's because he was doing so much immersion in the language by watching shows and having his parents to speak with that he was still able to learn perfect Korean, which is one of the reasons I heavily recommend anyone out there getting lots of listening practice and speaking practice in order to improve your Korean. Not just studying vocab or something like that. There's just no other way to learn Korean to his level without also getting a ton of exposure to the language and without practicing it on a regular basis. So I recommend find some Korean friends online if you don't have anyone near you, find some YouTube channels, or at least find some podcasts to listen to. Try to do that as much as you can. Okay, so now let's go on to IM's usage of filler words. And IM was the most difficult member for me to find out what his filler words are, not because he doesn't use filler words, but because he doesn't do that many live streams by himself, at least not recently. But I still think I was able to find what filler words he likes to use, and I'll share a clip of that, so see if you can find it too.
개인적으로 여러분들이 이제 조금 보시지 않았던 그런 컷들, 이제 비주얼적인 것들이 있어서 제가 일부러 제 방에서 하고 싶었습니다. 뭔가 이제 회사에서 자 이제 곡을 하나씩 설명을 해줄게요. 그거와 물론 5곡이 내 새끼고 나에 대한 얘기지만 이제
He's using the word 이제, which means now, but when this is used as a filler word, it's more like so now or okay now. And it's common for Koreans to use this filler word, but if I had to pick, it's just the only filler word I noticed him using more than the others. And if you listen for it, you'll hear him using it pretty often wherever he is.
이제 저도 이제 제 캐릭터인 만큼 애정을 가지고 강아지 탈을 쓴 고양이 귀엽죠? 이 모자는 이제 벗을 수도 있는데 보통 이제 많이 얘기하려고도 하고 이제 그 부담감이 이제 멤버들한테도 조금 사라진 것 같아서 제가 다 기뻐요 정말로.
Okay, so that's enough about his speaking. Let's talk briefly about his handwriting. And I have 2 letters that I want to share, and the first one is from 2022 and addressed to mon-bebe. My first impression of his writing is that it's the most unique writing style in the group because he has the most recognizable handwriting to me. There are several letters that he writes here differently from the other members. Like, look at how he writes the first line, and there are 3 letters that I want to point out. So focus on how he writes the letters iung, the circle letter, hiet, the H letter, and piup, the B letter. These are letters that have rounded features normally, and IM does something unique with them. And all 3 of these letters are in the first sentence. 안녕하세요. You can see it has the circle letter there. MONSTA X, and then IM입니다. You can see it has the piup there. So hello, I'm IM of MONSTA X. And you'll notice that whenever one of these 3 letters is used, they're drawn a bit larger than the other letters in the syllable. It's not huge, but it's noticeable. And 4 lines down, he also writes the word 함께 한. And you can see 2 of the hiet letters, and they're also quite large compared to the other letters. For an example of the piup letter, look at the sentence that starts with 가장 행복하고 빛나는. And you can see 2 of them in 복 and 빛. And they're also much larger, as well as the next line where he writes mon-bebe. So he definitely likes writing rounded letters a little bit larger. Besides this, I noticed he writes with a lot of space between his words. I'm not going to say this is part of his style because I think that here that was just to fill up the page. But what is another part of his style is that he's writing each letter completely separately from the next one. So it's not cursive at all. It's more like he's just writing one letter, then lifting up his pencil, and then writing the next letter like that for the entire message. This sort of writing style is actually really common. It's common among people who are studying Korean. It's how I used to write Korean when I was first starting, although IM obviously knows more Korean than I do. He also didn't use many shortcuts in writing that other Koreans use. Like you can see that he wrote the letter lir, the L letter, in 3 separate strokes and not as just a curvy snake that you'll often see others do. For example, in this sentence, 이러한 결정을 내리게 되었습니다. He writes the letter lir 3 times here and does it very properly, as well as the letter mium, the M letter, which he writes in 3 separate strokes properly, and which is also a letter people typically take shortcuts and try to write it as quickly as possible in just 1 or 2 strokes. His mium letters look like proper boxes, like in the word mon-bebe. Now, his handwriting overall still looks very nice, and it's all straight and balanced, and it's certainly nicer than some of my handwriting. It's just interesting to see that he chooses to write his letters more properly. It's definitely a conscious choice. But let's look at just one more letter, which is from 2025, and this one's shorter and it's written with a marker instead of a pencil, but to me his writing still looks mostly the same. So we can look for those same traits and see if we can find any. And I noticed that he shrunk his circle letters in this a lot. In fact, even the 0 in 2025 is a lot smaller. However, I can still see the large piup letter several times in here, especially in the sentence 기분이 좋네요. So if you're looking at his more recent letters, I think the larger piup will be the biggest giveaway that it's his writing. And overall, I like his handwriting and I think it matches him well because it's just as unique as he is.
여러분 안녕히 계세요. 수고했습니다.
Okay, and I could keep going on, but that's enough for today. If you like this video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to my channel for more content like this, as well as free Korean lessons. Thank you again to my Patreon supporters and channel members. There's a link you can visit to help support my channel in the video description box below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time. 그럼 다음에 또 봐!